I think we're good, but I can you hear me? Okay. Thank you. It's weird. Welcome back, Dusty. Welcome, Moya. I see you've joined us. I was just getting ready to start. See if anybody else joined us. Give it one more minute, and then I'll get started. Okay, so it looks like it might just be you and I. I should have the ability to add you in so you can actually talk to me, but for some reason, I don't have that capability right now, so I might be able to figure it out. But in the meantime, we'll get started. So welcome. I'm here to talk to you today about agility and how you build agility in 2021. I like to start out with just kind of giving you a background. I am a firm believer in no matter how great your product or service is, your people will actually make or break your business. And I've been working with people and in the people development business for the last 25 years and have worked with companies large and small and individuals and entrepreneurs over the years to help them become more effective at what they do. And primarily, my focus on that is helping them become better communicators, better interaction oriented people to engage others in a more effective way. So that's primarily my background and what I spend my life doing. As we go through the session today, please feel free to jot anything in the chat that you have questions about, and I will stop. I want this to be informative for you and make sure that you get the most value. I will be looking back and forth. I have two screens here, so it's a little confusing sometimes, but I'll do my best to stay on track. So as we start going down the path, I wanted to just define what we mean by agility. I hear that term used a lot, and I'm not sure that everybody really understands what that means. Agility is the ability to move both quickly and easily in response to change or a challenge. So when we think about that, there's two things, right? Quickly and easily. A lot of us can move quickly. However, the easy part is a little challenging because we have a tendency to want to be focused on the mindsets or the processes that we go to most often. And so when change happens or a challenge takes place, we then have a tendency to want to push back a little bit, especially if we're not implementing the change or the challenge. It's coming to us from somewhere else. So agility is really our ability to be flexible, but also to adapt quickly to whatever is coming at us and be able to read the situation or circumstance that's happening around us and make a choice as to how we actually respond to that. And what we know is that there is a huge correlation between agility and emotional intelligence. And one of the things my business has really been founded on is building emotional intelligence in the work environment. And emotional intelligence is one of those things that people hear it and they think they understand it, but they don't quite know what to do about it. How do I increase my emotional intelligence? Well, one of the ways that you do that is to build agility, and that's a skill set. There are a set of things that you learn over time that help you increase your ability to move quickly, to adapt, to change quickly, to be flexible based on what's happening around you. But it really has to start with self-awareness. I have to understand how I respond to the world, why I do the things I do, what are those things that make me feel good about who I am, but also the things that cause me challenge. And we all have those, whether you call them strengths and weaknesses or challenge areas, whatever it might be. We all have things that we do really, really well. And we also have things that, not so much. We can usually find other people around us to help us in those areas, but we also need to be able to build some level of competence in order to be able to live in the world. So that's the premise for what agility is and how it links to emotional intelligence. So why is that so important in today's world? One of the reasons, as you well know, is that we are living in a very different environment now. We're doing what we're doing here. We're no longer in the same room with each other in many cases, and we have to learn how to communicate more effectively and to be able to adapt to these kind of changes that we're being faced with in today's world. So when we look at why agility has become the critical competency, and it really has, if you look at the rising need for agility in the workplace, regardless of what kind of position you have, when we asked that question and we surveyed thousands of people across the country in multiple different positions, 90% of individual contributors said that agility is more important to their success now than it was 5 years ago. We didn't really talk about it. Something happened, you had to figure it out and move on. Now, what we are looking for when we're hiring people or moving people into new roles is how flexible and adaptable are they really? And we're using very strong behavioral interviewing questions to be able to target those kind of behaviors. 95% of managers and above said that agility is more important to their organization's success now than it was 5 years ago. Again, we can't continue to do things status quo. So it's really important for us to be able to push forward with new things, to be able to change situations quickly, and to be able to pull people in to work on new teams. So there's a lot of different activities going on. 97% of leaders agreed that developing emotional intelligence is crucial to being able to build an agile workforce. So they're looking at it from a global perspective. Where are we going to be 5 years from now? The pace of change is even going to be faster. When I think about when I started in the work world, which was many years ago, change was definitely there. We were going through all kinds of changes. I was in the telecommunications arena, and we were going through deregulation and all kinds of things that some of you may never have heard of. But the reality is we had to learn to adapt. But today, it is so much more present in our work worlds than it ever has been in the past, and it's just going to continue to happen. So when we look at building an agile workforce, we know that it starts with building emotional intelligence. You can't be agile if you're not strong in the foundational competencies of emotional intelligence. So that's why I wanted to share this information today, because I believe that all of the folks that are attending or participating today could get value from improving agility through emotional intelligence. So here's where I want to go this afternoon, and hopefully this will work for you. We want to really define what emotional intelligence is, because agility is only one little piece. There's all kinds of other pieces that go into it. And all of the different competencies and skills of emotional intelligence play very well together. So you'll see emotional intelligence as EQ, which is emotional quotient, or EI, which is emotional intelligence. Now, there's two different things there. Your emotional quotient, or your EQ, is what you know about emotional intelligence. Your EI is about how you actually exhibit emotional intelligence. So we're really looking at two different terms. People confuse them all the time, but the bottom line is you can know it all day long, but if you don't apply it, so what? So I really want to teach you some things that are going to help you develop your emotional intelligence skills and improve your EI factor, if you want to think about it from that perspective. We also want to talk about why it matters. I'll talk a little bit about that. And what are the 4 core emotional intelligence skills? There really are 4 sets of skills. And once you realize what they are, it brings everything back home. I say, oh, problem solving, that's one of them. Time management is another one. But being aware of me first is really the most critical one. The connection between emotional intelligence and the important outcomes that you have in your life, both personally as well as professionally. And those things are really, again, it's waking you up to what that means. And then what do I do in order to improve my emotional intelligence? So does that make sense? If you have questions around that, or concerns, or you want me to talk about something else, let me know. So, Moya, do you know what emotional intelligence is? Can you define that for me? Do you have any ideas? Can you just put in the chat yes, no, or what you think it is? Okay, here's my definition. Oh, there you go. The ability to regulate emotions and respond to others. Wow, you've gone through this before, haven't you? Regulate emotions. That's the terminology that emotional intelligence definitely uses in the background. So it's a simpler definition is your ability to recognize and understand emotions. So that's first. And then how skilled you are at actually using that awareness to manage your own responses to your emotions and to build relationships with others. Now, this is a book that I use with all my coaching clients. I wish I made money promoting it. I don't, but it is a really good tool. And if you've never seen it before, I highly recommend it. It's called Emotional Intelligence 2.0 by Travis Bradberry. And he has a company called Talent Smart. And I think he's just recently rebranded. So good information, good content. But we're going to use his definition along with a lot of other information that I have available to really delve into what is emotional intelligence. So why is it so important? Again, these are things that I've already mentioned, but relationships are really the bottom line of our business. If we can't build effective relationships, no matter what our job is, we can't be effective as employees, as business owners, as customer service people, as salespeople. Relationships are critical, and people are much more focused on doing business with people they can trust and that they feel comfortable about. Emotional intelligence links to bottom line performance. We can see a direct correlation now with all the research that's been done over the last 30 years between high levels of emotional intelligence and high levels of profitability. And they've driven, there's many research reports out there now that are available to show you the characteristics that drive some of those differences. One of the things that we know that helps job performance and bottom line performance is employee passion for what they're doing. And that's all tapping into the emotional intelligence of the individuals in your work environment, making sure that they have their needs met and that they have the capability and opportunities to speak out and talk about what's working and what's not working. We know that changes in the emotional brain are possible, which is really important. And a little later, I'll talk about personality and the fact that personality is fixed and your IQ or your ability to learn or capacity to learn is fixed. But your emotional intelligence is really something that you can develop throughout your lifetime until the last breath. There's no cap on it. So as we continue to explore and learn, we become better at applying the skills around emotional intelligence. And our brain actually creates new neurotransmitters and synapses to allow us to do that. It allows us to make different choices. And it always has been, which is pretty amazing. So this is the physical aspect of emotional intelligence. And, sometimes people don't really think about this as something that's happening in your brain. And we talk about emotions and intelligence. Those two things usually don't quite fit together, right? Emotions are feelings. Intelligence is thinking. The reality is we feel things before we assign meaning to them. And once you recognize that, then it becomes a little bit easier to understand why we do things that sometimes we wish we didn't or we could take back. So the stimulus comes in through the spinal column or the rear of your brain, right? So this is where everything happens. You feel it through that limbic system. And there's an immediate rush of some kind of an emotion. It could be happiness, it could be sadness, it could be anger, it could be frustration. And it's all the emotions come through us that way. Because we feel it first, we then assign meaning to it in the frontal cortex. So the feeling has to go forward into our brain and compute with the thought process in order for us to make a decision about how we respond to it. Now, that sounds really convoluted, and it takes place in a nanosecond, right? But here's the problem. There's this other thing, and so the frontal cortex is really your rational brain. It's what puts rational logic thinking to the feeling that you're having and says, yes, you're right on, or no, this is maybe not what you want to feel, and maybe we could do something different. So, whoops, I missed a spot here. I'm not sure what happened to my other slide. So what happens in your brain, okay, EQ combines these two areas, the rational brain with the limbic system, and says, wait a minute, we're not going to take action until we've thought about it. Now, in the old days, when we were flying from tigers and we were afraid of things around us, it was very, very good that our brains just automatically felt and we reacted from that response system. The downside with that in today's world is we have to assign meaning before we respond. Otherwise, we end up creating problems. For example, you're driving down the road and someone pulls out in front of you, and your immediate feeling is panic or fear or anger. One of those things shows up. And you react to that sometimes without really logically thinking through what you're going to do. And as you see yourself in that space, there's an adrenaline rush, there's a physical thing that happens to your body. And then you either react by slamming on the brakes, or some people throw hand signals, or some people scream and yell. Some people go into a place of what we call road rage. When that happens, that's called an amygdala hijack. Because right on the little corner of your brain, Okay, so it's like right down here below the limbic system. There's this little thing, it's about pea-sized, it's called the amygdala, and that's that fight or flight response. So if by chance that emotion hits there and we react from that space without thinking logically, then we open our mouth and insert our foot. That's when you do things that, as you hear words coming out of your mouth, you're wondering where they're coming from. And you look back and say, wow, what happened to me? You kind of lose sight of what matters. So what we want to do with emotional intelligence is to be able to make sure that we are moving past that amygdala as quickly as we possibly can. Now, it's a natural response, so we have to retrain our brain. And that's really what emotional intelligence is talking about. It's creating these new pathways between the limbic system and the rational brain and bypassing or at least minimizing the impact of the amygdala in situations where it doesn't make sense, right? So as we go through looking at that, so what does that do for us? Well, being able to do that, it helps us with critical skills that we need every day. The critical skills that we have through that really rely on strong emotional intelligence are all over the board. As you can see, we have, time management, decision making, tolerating change, what we were talking about earlier, that ability to be adaptable and agile, working in teams and being able to give and take and collaborate as opposed to wanting everything your way. The whole empathic listening process requires you to build emotional intelligence competencies related to listening and listening to understand as opposed to listening to agree or disagree or to prove right or wrong. Stress tolerance. Our stress tolerance can definitely be increased, and we can minimize the damage of stress by building better emotional intelligence skills. Relaxation techniques and different things that we can do for ourselves to be able to calm that anxiety level or those exciting times when the adrenaline rush happens. Presentation skills. I've met so many people in my lifetime that are scared to death to get in front of people. But again, it's building the level of self-awareness and knowing what you know and how to present effectively, and then building that muscle, if you want to call it that. If you have a muscle and you don't use it, then it just kind of atrophies. But we can rebuild those muscles by starting to practice. And presentation or speaking in front of groups is one of those things that you get better at it over time, but you have to be willing to take the risk. And that's definitely driven by your ability to know yourself and understand what's happening, and then to make a choice in terms of what you do with that. So breathing is a critical skill for presenters. And we think, well, we all breathe, right? You can't, if you're not breathing, you're not living. The downside to that is if you're not paying attention to your breathing, it's very easy to stop and hold your breath when you get upset about something or you're anxious. And the minute you do that, you block oxygen to your brain, which causes that cyclical event, right? The more panicked I get, the less I breathe. The less I breathe, the more panicked I get. So it's really teaching people with presentation and presentation skills how to breathe naturally and how to calm themselves down just by taking some deep breaths from the diaphragm and focusing in on themselves as opposed to what's happening out in front of them. So it sounds kind of hokey, but the reality is all of the things that you see here are really driven by the foundations of emotional intelligence. Anger management, trust, building trust is all about what you do. And what you do is how other people determine whether or not they're going to trust you. In order to know, because different people look for different things when it comes to building trust. So in order for you to know what they need from you, you need to pay attention to who they are and what's motivating them. And then, of course, we have the accountability factor, taking personal responsibility, customer service, being aware of what other people's needs are and being able to meet those needs. your flexibility, and your social skills, all founded in emotional intelligence. So as you can see, without it, we have a problem. And I'm sure you've met people who have low levels of emotional intelligence and high levels of emotional intelligence. So the question is, where are you and where would you like to be? And what can you do to develop that? And so really, there are many things that I do in my practice that help people build emotional intelligence. I use multiple assessments to help them create a level of self-awareness. The DISC tool is one of those. I use Wiley's Everything DISC Workplace on Catalyst, which is now an online learning system, and that's available to anyone who's interested. It really helps you understand why you do what you do, what works for you, what doesn't work for you, what your motivators are, what your stressors are. And then it helps you recognize those things in other people, what they prioritize in their work environment, what they want in order to be happy and successful in their environment, what challenges them. And then marrying all that together to say, okay, let's figure out how we can take what we know about ourselves and everybody else and figure out how to utilize that in the one-to-one relationships that we're building. So a couple of things of just to point out what EQ is not, and I mentioned this early on. EQ is not IQ. We know that IQ is pretty well fixed by the time you're 7 years old. You can continue to learn lots of stuff, but your IQ is never going to increase. So your ability or your aptitude for learning is not going to get higher. So that's the IQ piece of you that doesn't change. The other piece is personality, and when we're measuring emotional intelligence, we're not measuring personality type. That's something different, and personality type is definitely in the DISC process. But when I use DISC to help with emotional intelligence, it's so that you can get to know you from a personality perspective and then utilize that knowledge to help you build the emotional intelligence skill sets. Your personality, again, depending on who you believe, in terms of the research that's out there, is usually fixed by the time you're 5 to 7 years old. And I've even heard now that there's some research that says it's by the age of 3. So the reality is your personality, by the time you're 10, it's pretty well there. And that's okay. Personality is who you are. What we're talking about with emotional intelligence is what you do with who you are, how you use your personality in the world around you. So it's not saying you have a problem with you personally. Sometimes it may be that what you're doing is having a negative impact on someone else. And so emotional intelligence helps create that level of awareness. So for example, when I'm actually working one-to-one and I can see people's faces, which I can't right now, I don't talk as fast as I'm talking. I pay attention to what they need from me, and I can adjust and adapt my approach based on whether they want more information or less information, whether they want detail or stories, whether they want bullet points. And so I've learned how to read people, if you want to call it that, not label, but read where they are and what their needs are so that I can modify my language. Not what I'm trying to accomplish, and it's not manipulation. It's really helping me help them more effectively. And that's what EQ is about. It's not about changing personality or modifying personality. Who you are is exactly who you're supposed to be. What you do with who you are sometimes can be a problem. And so that's where emotional intelligence really comes in to say, okay, let's try a different approach and see if we get a different response, a different result. And that's really what we want to be able to develop. So the value of being able to put all these pieces together is that you now have a very good picture of who you are, what you bring to the world, and what you want to develop further as you go forward. So the 4 EQ skills, and this gives you a high level picture of what they are. There's actually two breakdowns. There's a set of personal competence skill sets that are all about me, what I see in myself, and then what I do with what I see. So those are self-awareness and self-management. And we'll break these down a little further as we go through. But you can see that self-awareness, self-management really is about me. You can't get good at self-management until you're really good at self-awareness, although some people think they are. And what happens a lot of times is people have blind spots. And I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've had these situations where you're doing something thinking that you're being effective, not realizing that what you're doing is actually annoying someone else or making them feel uncomfortable. And if they don't tell you, how do you know, right? So the reality for self-awareness is not only do I need to know me, but I also have to have an understanding of how other people see me. And that's a critical component of self-awareness. And the only way we know that is if we ask. And if we ask people for their input and their feedback, we have to be willing to accept it and not judge it, right? Which is also a component of self-awareness and agility. When you ask someone for input, you have to be willing to accept it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but it does mean you have to be willing to take it in and at least consider it. So we'll talk more about that later. So personal competence is all about self-awareness and self-management. And that's where the agility factor really comes in. Because if you know that you have some inflexibility around certain things, then those are the areas that you really want to improve upon in order to increase your level of flexibility and adaptability. But you have to know what those things are first. So it's a process of discovery, really, on the self-management side or self-awareness side. The second set of competencies are what we call social competencies. Those are all about what I see around me, what I see from others, and then what I do with what I see from others, along with what I do with what I know about me. So it brings everything together. So it's all about me first, what I do with me. I can make choices, and then learning about other people, and then making choices that make the best sense for both of us and the situation at hand. Sounds simple, but not easy. But there are very special activities that you can put in play to help you build on each one of these. And the book that I mentioned early on, the EQ 2.0 or Emotional Intelligence 2.0, actually has a little assessment in the back. If you buy the book new, there's an assessment little card in the back that tells you to go online to Talent Smart, and they will do a little assessment. It's included in the cost of the book. And it gives you a little printout of what your current level of emotional intelligence in these 4 areas actually is. Now, this is based on your own rating, but they also have an online tool that allows you to go in and actually learn about the different components. So if you want to discover more about the EQ side of that, I would highly recommend that. The other thing, as I mentioned, is the Agile tool that I use, which is a component of DISC, but it's really a much more broad focus on emotional intelligence and 8 primary mindsets that we shift from. Most of us usually work from the same mindsets because they're comfortable. We have our comfort zones. However, this really shines the light on the fact that there are at least 5 or 6 other mindsets that we typically don't use that really could serve us well if we learned how to do that. So more on that later. So when we look at self-awareness, this is really the definition as it comes through in the book, the ability to accurately recognize your emotions as they happen. And this is what's important when I coach people, and I'm an executive level coach, so I work with people at all levels of the organization. And I'll have people come to me and say, wow, I just don't know how I blew that meeting. I was prepared. I had everything. So then I go backwards with them and I start asking questions. Well, tell me what you felt. And they'll say, frustrated, right? Well, what did that feel like inside? this is the thing. We don't really pay attention to what happens to us physiologically when we have an emotion. It just happens and it takes over. Emotional intelligence, self-awareness is really saying, okay, I had that feeling of frustration, but what did it feel like really? What happened to me? Did my heart race? Did my heart stop? Did I feel like somebody hit me? Was it how did that really impact me in a physiological way? Because once I can relate that feeling physically to the emotion that I was feeling, to the situation, then it becomes a little bit easier to kind of go back through that and figure out what was really driving me to behave that way. And in many cases, it's because we have a need that is not being met. Now, that sounds hokey, but the reality is, if we are in a situation where we believe our values and beliefs are being supported, then we're much more apt to act in an appropriate way. If we're in a situation where we believe that our values and beliefs are being threatened, where our competency may be threatened, where someone may challenge information that we put out on the table and we feel that it's threatening who we are, then we have a tendency to respond in a negative way. But you've got to be able to tie the pieces together to understand what really drives that emotion for you. And then what happens when that emotion shows up? Because now I can go back through time, record a couple of things that happen and say, okay, so now I get the correlation between all these different things happening. What can I do differently next time to keep focused as opposed to allow myself to go down the rabbit hole? And that's really what I do a lot with my coaching clients, is help them look at individual situations and just backtrack. Tell me what that looked like. Tell me what it felt like. What was the outcome of that? What could you do differently next time? And the more you practice that, the easier it becomes. And that's the self-management factor. Using that awareness to choose what you say and do. You still feel the feeling. So it's not about ignoring the feeling by any means. You still feel the feeling. But you make a choice in terms of how you respond to that feeling, as opposed to allowing the feeling to drive you. You don't want to respond from feeling. It's usually not an effective thing. And so then when we go down the path of social awareness, again, it's looking at the emotions and perspectives of others. So if you're in a team meeting and someone loses their cool or shuts down, the best thing you can do, either online or offline, is to say, hey, I can see something's up with you. Let's talk through it. What happened? What was missing? So you really want them to be able to figure out what caused them to act that way, especially when it's someone that you have interacted with before and you know it's out of character. One of the things that has really helped me with social awareness factor is making the assumption that people are coming from a place of good intention. 99% of the time, that's the true statement. I know that there are some people who want to give us a bad day, but most people don't wake up wanting that. So if there is a situation that happens, I really have to go back into my head and say, and this is where the self-awareness and self-management come in, how else could I look at this situation? This is not directed at me. There's something going on for that individual, and I don't know what it is, but what could I do to help them put it out on the table so we can deal with it? And that's where emotional intelligence is a skill set. That's agility. That's flexibility. That's the ability to hold true to yourself while exploring for someone else to help them get past a difficult time. It takes a long time to practice that, but it can be done. And that goes back to the relationship management. It's using that awareness of my emotions, your emotions, to be able to manage those interactions more effectively. And so as we bring all these pieces together, what are the things I need to do, Carole, right? That's what people say. Okay, so theoretically it makes sense, but how do I do it? So this looks a little different than the other slides. This is really one of the things that I have put together using the DISC Agile EQ, because we look at it from the standpoint of ability to read the emotional and interpersonal needs of the situation, not just the people, and to be able to respond appropriately. So it's, EQ originally started out people to people, and now we're looking at it from an organizational perspective as well. So as you go about your business, if you're working in a team or you're an entrepreneur, you're on your own, you're still working with clients and customers, and you've got to be able to adapt to what they need or what their organizations need. So this is just something that I wanted to share with you. These are what we call the agile EQ mindsets. And as you look around this map, you can see there are 8 different mindsets. Now, I have to put my glasses on because my eyes don't see these little prints anymore, but hopefully it's bigger for you. So as you can see, it's starting at the top. The dynamic mindset is all about initiating action, influencing people, and projecting a strong social presence. So they like to be out there, and they want to be in the forefront. And as a result of that, everything that they do in their day-to-day is going to be driven by those 3 primary needs. And they're going to want to create that around them. The outgoing mindset is all about establishing and maintaining relationships. They're very expressive with their emotions and pretty much unfiltered thoughts. And they share a lot. They're very open and honest about what's happening with them. They can exaggerate a little bit, but they are definitely people who are very talkative. And when they use that mindset, they expect other people to share that same mindset. The downside is a lot of people don't, especially when you're in a problem-solving situation or something else is happening around them. Some people just really need time to sit back and reflect. The empathizing mindset is all about reaching out with compassion, seeking to understand people's emotional needs and struggles, and being supportive of them during that period of time. Again, it's a great mindset. It really is very supportive of people, but in some situations, it doesn't make sense to go down that path. What you need is someone who's on the other side of the circle, which is the more resolute mindset. Being able to stand your ground and make decisions without the emotional component coming into play. And that's really difficult for someone who lives on the right side of the disc map. So these 8 different mindsets are really taking DISC to a whole new level when it comes to emotional intelligence. The receptive mindset is staying open to others' ideas and being willing to compromise or set aside their own needs and their preferences to be able to meet the needs of others. Again, there are times when that's important, but as a leader, there are also times when you have to take a stand and let people know this is the way we're going. So shifting your mindset is really important, and it is situational. And so I'm not going to go through each one of these, but I want you to be aware that there are other skill sets that you can learn. Not that you want to act out of those mindsets all the time, but there are certainly times when they are necessary. One of the biggest challenges that I have, because I do live over on the right side of the disc map, is the objective mindset. And that is really separating facts from emotions and keeping the discussion focused on logic. Because I am a feeling person, so I have a tendency to go down those feeling paths. So when I am in a situation where I have to really focus on what makes the most sense for the organization, for the business, I have to take the emotional side out of it. Otherwise, it's really difficult to make a decision that looks at the total picture, because I am so focused on the people side. So hopefully that's helpful for you as we look at the breakdowns of these things. The self-assured is really all about, that mindset is all about projecting confidence and taking charge. And these folks are really good at that. The downside is if they do that too often and in the wrong situations, they shut people down. And again, it's the self-awareness factor. Someone who's really strong on that self-assured mindset needs to know when it's time to sit back and take a more humble approach and really pay more attention to what other people need as opposed to what they're trying to push. Same thing with the dynamic. Dynamic mindset is influencing others and taking action on new ideas. That makes sense at certain points in a situation, but not always. Outgoing, building up relationships. And when we look at the empathizing, understanding others, reaching out to be supportive, all leaders, no matter what your role is, whether you're an individual contributor or you're a boss or a manager or a business owner, you need to learn how to empathize. Empathy is a critical emotional intelligence skill. When people feel heard and listened to, they are much more willing to move in a direction that you need them to go. If you gloss over their feelings or gloss over the situation that's going on for them, they are not going to respond well. They're probably going to dig their feet in and push back. So empathy is a huge skill that will help you with agility, as well as many other of the skill sets that we've taken a look at. Being receptive, keeping an open mind, considering other people's perspectives. Again, a very important mindset that some of us struggle with. We believe we have the right answer and we just want to make it work. So we have a tendency not to listen effectively, not to listen to understand. We listen with an agenda, either waiting for our turn to talk or to agree or disagree to prove right or wrong. And those are really not good listening approaches most of the time. Being composed, appearing calm and diplomatic. Again, some of us struggle with that. Have you ever worked with someone who run around like their hair's on fire all the time? If that's their mindset, that there's constantly chaos and they're constantly putting out fires, they're creating that kind of an environment for the people around them. And so it would make sense for them to take a look at one of the other mindsets to employ more often, to be able to create some semblance of harmony in the work environment as opposed to chaos. That objectivity, which I mentioned before, is my biggest challenge, thinking rationally and clearly without the emotional component, and then resisting pressure to cave in. When you really believe in something, standing up for what you believe in and pushing to make it happen, but doing it in a way that you're proving that there's value in that direction, not just telling people they have to go there. So all of these mindsets have specific guidelines on what they look like, what you need to think about in order to develop those mindsets, and then how to actually apply the mindsets in your life going forward. So that's something that's available to you. As I mentioned, this is what we call Agile EQ. It is a DISC component. It is available to you. If you'd like to learn more, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me. But going back to using our EQ skills, it's really about knowing myself, understanding others, making better decisions, seeing and seizing opportunities, looking at problems before they escalate and figuring out how to fix them, engaging other people in that process, and being able to manage through difficult situations and conversations, having those tough conversations and not glossing over conflict. I get called in a lot of times with organizations to deal with conflict, and they tell me it's a personality conflict. And the actuality is it's not about personality. It's about what we're doing. There's a behavioral component, and it goes right back to emotional intelligence. Who you are is exactly okay. It's what you do with who you are that causes the problem. And conflict is actually a good thing if we learn how to manage it effectively. Conflict is what causes us to learn and grow and change. If we don't have conflict, then we never do anything different. We just stay the same. Conflict is a difference of opinions that has an emotional component to it. And so if we learn that we're not arguing or we're not fighting with each other, we're trying to solve a problem, and we focus on the problem, then we can use our emotional intelligence with others to figure out the solution to the problem without the personal attack. And that's where conflict gets really ugly. That's a whole nother class. But I do a lot of work with that. So this is, again, skill sets that will help you. We know that EQ accounts for about 50% of job perform. No, I'm sorry. Where's my 60% of job performance for supervisors through CEOs? So, and I think this number has actually increased in the last 5 years. What percent of top performers are high in EQ? This is, again, research based, 90%. 90% of your top performers are going to have very high levels of emotional intelligence. And yes, they have very high technical skills too. But we're talking about when we compare technical skills to technical skills, and the difference is EQ. That makes a big difference when you're looking at who do I want to hire for this position. What percentage of low performers are high in EQ? 20%. Okay, so the majority of people who are developing their emotional intelligence are definitely outperforming their counterparts that are technically sound but don't have the ability to interact effectively with others. And that's a huge statement. So we know that EQ increases with age. I'm just going to go through these relatively quickly. And part of this is maturity. Part of it is lessons learned. Part of it is experience. But part of it is also the focus. People, as they age, want to interact more effectively. They don't want to deal with the pettiness anymore. So it really is a combination of a lot of things. This just shows relative emotional intelligence scores with different job functions. And again, I think these numbers are you're probably going to see these numbers shift a lot in the last 5 years. EQ and job titles. Supervisors and managers have a higher EQ score than their director, executive VP, and senior executive, which is very interesting because people at that senior level, a lot of times they lose sight of the fact that they need to interact effectively with people. And so that's where I get called in. We've got a great exec who is leaving people in his wake. And so it's coming back in to say, okay, time out. You're running the show, but you've got a lot of people that need to be following you. And if you're not paying attention to what their needs are and adapting your approach to pull them in, they're not following. So that's not a thing, not a good thing. But it's good for me because it keeps me busy. So the challenge is, this is selecting for EQ. I'm going to pass through all of this. In the fields I have studied, emotional intelligence is much more powerful than IQ in determining who emerges as a leader. Now you can see this is Warren Bennis. IQ is a threshold competence. You need it, but it doesn't make you a star. Emotional intelligence can, because you have the ability to navigate, and through whatever the political climate might be, you have the ability to pull people together and to engage them in a way that makes them feel comfortable following you. And that's really the magic. So what do I do about it? What I would suggest is looking at those 4 areas, the 4 competence areas. And hopefully I will have some contact information. I can send you a worksheet that will give you a set of skills that you can actually go back to. But if you feel like you're struggling in self-awareness or self-management, there's a whole set of different skill sets that you can focus on to build. And what I suggest is you pick one thing and then you find strategies that will help you build that one thing. So if listening, for example, is one of the skill sets that you want to develop, because we have the internet now, you can go find anything and everything on building effective listening skills. Building active listening is what you want. Listening to understand. You can work with someone like me who can help you do that. You can go online and find courses or lots of information on the internet to help you develop those skill sets. But it's really a matter of picking and working on one thing until you feel like you've mastered it, and then you add something else. Oops, I keep hitting that. The key is you want to continue to practice it and ask other people to help you. That's always very important. And make sure that you're paying attention to your progress. Have someone, an accountability partner. With a lot of the coaching that I do, is group coaching. And as a result of the group coaching, people will work with each other as accountability partners and actually help each other out. So they come up with their own metrics and start working through those various areas of activity. So that would be my recommendation to you. I am almost at 4:00, so I want to stop talking. My throat is getting dry too. So I believe, Moya, you are the only person left in the room. We did have some other folks join us for a little while, which was nice. If you have any questions or would like any additional information, please type it in the chat. I haven't figured out how to get you to be able to talk to me. So. Okay. No, looks like we're good to go. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate your participation and I wish you the best. Hey, I got you. I couldn't make this work earlier.
Well, the person has to request to do it.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Most of the people are requesting to do it, so I requested just
Oh,
so
well,
you
thank
can see.
you. Thank you.
No
Yeah,
problem.
I like seeing faces. It's a whole lot better than looking at my
Hard
own.
without them. Yeah, I agree. It's almost like
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a setting that made people share, but I didn't have any people show their face on mine, but they did chat a little. So.
Okay. Well, yeah. So I kept clicking that moderation panel thinking there was something that I could open, but it wasn't working. So that's why. Okay.
Yep. I can't, when I heard you saying that, I was like, let me hit ask to share. And that's the only way. That's the only way.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you joined me. Okay.
I know, right?
So I will stop sharing my screen.
And I think everybody's going to the main stage now.
No,
So
I'm not.
yeah, I don't
I'm
think I
going.
have to go pick up Taylor, but
Well, I'm going back to my leadership branding class. You should go. You should go. They're having a social at Glory Days for an alumni's invited.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to pick up my daughter and I have to take her to work. ATD was supposed to have a meeting tonight. I really don't want to go. I was supposed to have a board meeting with YMCA, and I've asked them to change the board meetings from that Thursday so I can be at the ATD stuff. Right. So this one I probably won't be at ATD, but from going on I will.
Okay.
I'll just have to let the Campo board know that my job is requiring me to be at the ATD stuff. So
your job. It's a terrible thing.
Oh my God. So hard. So funny. But you know, it's hard for them to move it if I make it sound like it's a good thing.
Well, what time is the meeting that you have to go to?
Well, the board, the Campo board meeting is at, let me see here, 6:15.
Oh, okay.
I have some time after I take my daughter to work at 5 to just kind of.
Yeah, I was just saying, so drop her off because she's working on Causeway now, isn't she?
Yeah, yeah. Are you going to be there?
We're going to the Glory Days. Go across the street. We'll be on the patio.
Okay, I'll see you guys there.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.